Hello, everybody. My name is Chad Jennings, and welcome back to another instantiation of client stories with IBM. I'm the head of customer voice and product experience for IBM software. And in the series, we take a deep dive into a customer's use case. We see what problem they solved. We see how they solved it. We talk about what they learned and a couple impact statements, like what results it actually joined or created. I'm joined today by Jakub Piotrowski, I practiced that, who is the VP of Product at Bud Financial. And Jakub, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. And can you start by introducing yourself and your company?
Hello, Chad. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. My name is Jakub Piotrowski. So yeah, I think it was like 99% correct. And I am VP of Product at Bud. And Bud is a company that specializes in turning raw financial data into customer intelligence so that every team within the bank and also the customers of the bank can access this information to make better decisions and to drive growth. And we do this both for employees of the bank, but also we have some products and features that can serve the clients or customers of those banks through the digital channels.
All right, and you've got some famous customers. Can you list a couple here and give an idea of you also process at pretty high scale? So give everybody a couple orders of magnitude here.
Yes. So so probably our best known customer is HSBC. So actually, interestingly, HSBC was first our customer since I think 2019, and they liked the product so much that they decided to also become one of our investors.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. But we do work with all types of financial institutions. So we are working with fintech startups, we are working with credit unions, we are working with community banks, but also with multinational organizations. The biggest client that we have is serving more than 10 million retail customers and is processing more than 500 million transactions every month, transactions made by those customers. So yeah, it can get pretty big in terms of the scale.
And with any data, application nowadays, people can throw around big numbers. The point, dear listener, of us mentioning those is just to indicate they really, Bud and their customers are operating at significant scale. And so the architecture that we get into has been stress tested. Hey, let's dive into the use case. What did you build, and what was the primary use case you're trying to address?
So as I said, the most important thing that we are trying to get to is to be the customer intelligence platform for the bank. And it means that we want to get the best possible understanding of financials of each customer. And the best way of doing this, and the foundation of lots of the things that we're doing, is transactions. So transactions, anything that is related to spending, income, that we then enrich, and we have our own kind of in-house infrastructure, which is AI-based, that is able to make sense of this data. And so to give you a tangible example, when you go out and buy coffee, you pay with your card, the transaction travels through multiple intermediaries and ends with your bank. That might be our client. If they are our client, they will send us the data from this transaction, which might be of different levels of quality, and our objective is to understand what category it is. So it's probably going to be food, and then coffees, and then maybe coffee shops, depending on how many levels of hierarchy you want to apply. We might be able to identify the merchant, might be able to add a logo of that merchant, find location, which is possible based on kind of multiple signals that might be in that transactional data, and then understand if it is something that would be recurring, maybe there is some pattern to it, and build additional insights from that. And all that within the time that passes from your tapping at the coffee shop and getting that notification from your mobile banking app that you just made a payment.
So hang on. So you tap your card, you buy a coffee, the transaction is then logged, and then you enrich it with all of those different dimensions of data that you just said. You log it back with your customer, the bank in this case, and that all happens before you get the green check mark that it's approved.
Yes, for some of the clients, this is exactly how it looks, because for some of the clients, the data that we are adding is not used only to create a nice user experience for the customer, but it also might go into fraud detection. It might go into any kind of finance management related scenarios, risk assessments, and so on. And in many of the cases, you want to persist that data when it happens, so you don't have to return to this later. So you just want to have it all in one go. And in some cases, those are sensitive scenarios like fraud. But in some cases, it's just a question of convenience of not having to return to this later.
I mean, it's like we're going to talk about constraints in your system and design constraints, and the significant one is keeping it inside the approval loop of any credit card transaction. Let's dig into that. So clearly there was a time one. You've got 100 milliseconds loop that you've got to be within. But what other were the big constraints that you needed to address with your design?
So the time requirement depends on the specific integration pattern, and not every client has the same requirement. But what we are able to do is we are able to process all transactions under 5 milliseconds, so not to introduce any delay.
I said 100. You mean?
No, 100 is a long. That's so the whole cycle might take that, maybe even like a little more, but we don't want to add to this. So under 5 milliseconds is our objective.
You need to be faster than all the other elements in your bank system.
Yes.
Wow. Okay,
yes,
that's a tough constraint.
We don't want anyone to wait for us. But what is even more important is we don't want to have false positives. So false positives is the worst thing that can happen, because false positives increase cost, because they might create disputes, because we might show something that the client is not going to recognize and they want to call the bank, and that costs, and it might raise false fraud alarms and lead to maybe bad credit score, because there might have been a major mistake.
And a false positive in our simple example with the credit card and the coffee would be categorizing that not as food, but as like an automotive purchase.
Oh, probably the worst thing that could happen is if we categorize it as, let's say, collections. So you have a relation with collections, with debt collection agency, and we just said that this is it, because this automatically flags up in many places.
Right. Okay. So the false positives would be equivalent to like getting the characterization or the labeling wrong, and it's better for your customers for you to say, yo, we can't do that one in time. Let's talk about how you tailored your solution to those, that tight. False positives is bad, mistakes in the characterization is bad. It's better to declare that you can't do it as opposed to put out a wrong one. So accuracy is really important. Timing is really important. How did you tailor the solution to accommodate these really strict constraints?
Yeah, so those are constraints that are really driven by the functional side of what we're doing. But we also have quite a few requirements when it comes to anything from what you expect from a bank grade provider, but then also being able to meet requirements of our clients around location. So where are we hosting the solution? And it's both in some cases being in the country or in the region because the regulator requires you to be there, but in some cases it's also a question of being relatively close to the data centers of our clients. And then there is also a question of which of our clients want to or are happy to be part of multi-environment setup, or which of our clients would like to have something that would be dedicated. And then also there are different kind of hybrids there. So we don't when we're looking at our kind of mid-sized and big clients, we don't have two that would be alike, and we need to be able to provide flexibility in terms of the infrastructure and how the solution is set up and how it's integrated, that is meeting their requirements, because one of the things that we want to avoid is big integration projects. So we want to just adopt to what's already in place and be able to run with it.
Makes sense. And then, so given that we've got these stringent constraints around accuracy and whatnot, how did you start choosing your elements of your system? Like I'm thinking about specifically performance bottlenecks that you're trying to solve for, or trying to make sure you can eliminate.
So there are a couple of elements, of course, and the things that are critically important for us, we are building ourselves. But one thing that it probably wouldn't be a wise idea to build is the database engines. So we are currently using Astra as the main place where we are storing transactional data. So this is like when we're talking about transactions, they all end up in Astra. There is a small caveat: some of our clients actually don't want us to persist the data. Now, how did we arrive at this? So I mean, we started with MySQL, and we started with MySQL because, well, it was just something that people felt comfortable with and was around. And we quickly, the moment we started working with banks, we realized that that's not the best possible the best possible solution. So we moved to Cassandra, which was a significant step up in terms of being able to deal with slightly unpredictable loads that vary from client to client. But the problem was that we've done it as a kind of self-hosting, like managed by bot. And the moment we started getting all those requests for slightly different setup and hosting in different place, the cost, the effort of managing it ourselves was so high that we started to look for an alternative, and Astra happens to be that. So we basically solved the performance step to a large extent by moving from MySQL to Cassandra, but then we got it to the enterprise grade when we moved it from Cassandra to Astra. So that was the process behind this.
Gotcha. And Astra DB, which is made by DataStax, which was recently acquired by IBM, is how you and I got onto this conversation together. Well, that's thanks for kind of like running us through like what the requirements are and kind of what a couple of the key elements of the architecture were. I think everybody's ready. Let's get into the architecture. Maybe you can walk us through it and break down the components.
So, going from left to right, well, we are ingesting data. So there are like lots of different data sources that we're looking at. All that goes through ingestion engine, which is the place that is giving us the flexibility and the ability to connect to different streams, whether it's going to be real time, whether it's a batch, whether it's something that comes from open banking, and so on. Now, all this then gets into the core, and if it's a financial transaction, that transaction is going to go to the enrichment log, which is an odd one on this diagram, but I'll explain why. So in some cases, when the client only wants us to enrich transaction, but not persist it, not do anything else with it, just get the category merchant and get it back, what happens after enrichment is the core is going to basically send that transaction back or forward it to the system of the client. And in some cases, enrichment itself is the product because this is what ends in front of the customer. This is also what might fit into the fraud detection systems and so on. In most of the cases, however, those transactions, along with other data points, are going to Astra, which is, as I said, the transactional data store, which is the source of information about the activity of the customer to all the products that we have. So each time the end customer will be looking at the transactions, let's say in the digital banking channels, or maybe looking at some finance management features or predicted spending. Part of input to that is the transactions from Astra. But we also have.
Sorry, just to clarify, the end customer would be somebody like me who wants to look at the categorizations of my expenses over the course of time. So you're actually making this product like for end customers, individuals, clients of your banks, as well as for the banks.
Yes, correct. And actually, so there's a nice story when you think of the customer that you're looking at the coffee shop transaction in your digital channels. The same view might be also something which is very useful for your financial advisor or maybe a contact center agent. So we have a product that supports that, which is basically thinking of what is going to be relevant information about the customer, but looking at the single customer. But we also have a platform that allows analytics across all customers, and this is when BigQuery comes into play, because for those clients that are using this, we would siphon transactions into BigQuery, and then this is where more analytics across multiple customers is enabled. There are dashboards and there are different models that would be combing to this data, looking for patterns and so on. But you move from, I'm talking to a single customer, thinking about the single customer, I'm looking at the affordability of that single customer, into I'm looking at the whole population and trying to make sense of that.
It's pretty cool that your diagram here has like this transactional element through Astra, and then that is, consumed by the analytical portion, which is on the right-hand side, as well as by the end customer. It's a nice little, call it efficiency in your architecture. Can you talk a little bit about any optimizations that you made, and particularly getting like the accuracy you pointed to is really important, and false positives are really bad. So you got to be accurate, or you got to know that you can't do it and you got to give up real fast. How do you manage that?
Yes. So it's never-ending process of training models, observing the results, providing more data, getting feedback, training again, and just trying to figure out what we can do to improve it. And probably the biggest thing, so like, of course, like this is all with the big caveat of there are foundation models that are pretty good, and it's tempting to take all your transactions and put them into ChatGPT and see what comes out. And a lot of the times, it's actually the outcome is decent.
But is it decent enough?
So the problem with it is it's not, and the challenge is actually there are three areas where the LLMs are underperforming. By far, the worst thing that happens is they will occasionally hallucinate, which is bad, which is creating false positives. And this is something which is very difficult to control. And we have a way around this, which is we keep everything in-house. So when we are talking about AI-based infrastructure, it's models that we have built and trained. We are not letting any foundation model into the loop of enrichment. Of course, we use them as tools to accelerate certain things and so on, but they are actually not involved in the enrichment process. All data and all models are ours, and we know exactly what is happening, which gives us explainability, another very important thing for banks, but also prevents hallucination. But in order for all this to work, we need to have humans in the loop. So although we do a lot of automated training and we do a lot of things that would be based on data sets that we procure from the market, lists of merchants and so on, at the end of the day, the key decisions are made by humans that are the ultimate source of truth, especially when it comes to training. And this is something which makes a difference in terms of being able to, at the same time, have the highest possible coverage. So almost all transactions are categorized, almost all transactions would have an entity or merchant and so on. But we also minimize the risk of having false positives. And that is, at any point in time, at the bot, there is a labeler, or most of the time, quite a few of them, that would be looking at transactions, at most unmatched tokens, new things that happened, and making decisions on how to handle this. So all of this gives us an architecture which won't hallucinate, but also another thing which I think is, well, this is changing, and let's see how it evolves. But currently, even if we take any of the foundation models and if we fine-tune it, we are going to be able to deal with transactions around 60 times faster, and also we're going to be a lot cheaper, and we're talking about like 120 times or more in terms of cost of processing it. And that gives us a little bit of mold in terms of, well, someone is okay with hallucinations. Can we use a foundation model to do what we're doing?
Well, that's a really interesting point. So like by creating basically what, a small LLM, right, an SLM as opposed to a large language model hosting yourself, you're able to like keep the accuracy where you needed to it. You put humans in the loop to train it, and then it was faster and cheaper.
Yes, correct. And this is, of course, this is not the foundation model. It has smaller scope. It's specialized. It's looking at the closed taxonomy most of the time. So you can't compare it, but it's fit for purpose. And that thing it's supposed to do, it does pretty well.
And that's, I mean, clearly that's a trend that we see in the industry. Like the closer you can keep your model to be fit for purpose, the better results you get out of it. Let's push on a little bit and talk about the impact that you deliver and the value that you're delivering to the end user. And we noted before, it's still up on the screen here. You've got end customers, individuals, clients of your banks, and you've got the banks. Can you tell us a little bit about what this architecture provides to each categorization inside the loop, but like how do they go ahead then and use it?
Yes, of course. So first, even the enrichment itself sometimes is the product, and it's being put in front of the end user and also fed into internal systems. And we are able to consistently deliver accuracy that is exceeding 97% with latency under 5 milliseconds. And we're doing this not only categorizing transactions, but also we are able to provide merchants. We have around 20 million merchants that we are matching to, and around 30 million locations. So it's market leading in terms of accuracy, in terms of ability to say with certainty what a transaction was. But we also have products that are taking advantage of this enrichment and then are building additional value-adding features like Engage, which is what is putting the finance management features in digital channels for the customers. So this is something that then you'd use to maybe manage your finances, to maybe to create budgets, maybe to understand the future of your cash flow. Now, when done right, this can increase upsell through digital channels by up to 50%, just because you're providing context and you have this trusted place for the end customer to engage with their finances. And now all of a sudden, all the things that you're talking about in terms of financial products start to make sense through the lens of individual spending or income patterns. We also have the Assess product, which is, well, especially in the UK, with proliferation of open banking, it created a new category. So there's a whole set of businesses that specialized in unsecured lending, especially for people that would have a thin file or would not have good enough credit history to get it from like a high street bank. Looking at your financial transactions to understand how you are doing right here, right now, fills the gap. So even if your credit score is low or non-existent, if we can look at your statement and if you can understand this and you can do this in an automated way, we might lead to actually a very good outcome. So it's created a whole new category. And then
that's really interesting, right? Because, folks who don't have a lot of, like, maybe somebody like, 21, 22, fresh out of college, or like, just young person, they don't have a long credit history. You can pull a lot more richness out of like detailed transactional analysis than you could after, like, would you say it was a thin file or a thick file? Or
yeah, thin file is the kind of the term that some of the people in the industry use basically as an explanation for why the credit reference agency is saying no.
Well, let me ask you, I got two more questions for you. Lessons learned, right? You've built a fast feedback loop system. Oh, by the way, you can take the architecture down unless you want to refer to it again. But you built a transactional system on one side, an OLAP system on the other side. You're serving two different sets of clients. You're serving hundreds of millions of different. Like, what did you learn? Like, you did a lot in here. Like, clearly there's a nugget of gold in for the listeners.
In most of the cases, you need to, when you are trying to deal with data, you, despite of all the evolution of all kind of like AI tools that can help you with understanding it, you need to have clear plan for what it is that you want to get out of it, and you most of the time you need to have human in the loop. And this is, like I already said it, I'm going to repeat this. This really matters a lot in terms of being able to deal with uncertain elements, and also that.
And that's a human in the training loop, right? Your loop is so tight you can't have a human in approving loop.
Oh,
clearly.
yes.
Yeah, training.
Of course. Loop. So this is training loop, but this is also just observing how the system is performing. So create an infrastructure in which you can look into it and you can understand what are the patterns and what are the things that are changing, and you can basically get the sense for how to evolve, how to do things like, as an example, change of taxonomy, because there might be a completely new type of business appearing. Like we had this with the likes of Uber and Lyft, which called for, this is a change of spending pattern. We had this with buy now pay later providers, which is yet another kind of category that emerged. Mm-hmm. So you are going to be able to fully understand this only if you put humans in there and let them decide what it really means in terms of the end product and the end customer.
That's a really interesting it's a really interesting observation, right? In this, the continued push to move towards more automation, more like you're saying, having people in the loop to really make your training high quality is really important. All right, last question. We've covered a lot of ground, like from the architecture, lessons learned, like fast transactions, big analytics. What do you see next? What's some of the next evolution, given how quickly like the technology that you're using is also evolving?
We look at the data that we have and look at the applications that we have, and inevitably there is a fusion of the transactional and analytical world.
Right.
Because we believe that there's quite a lot of potential in the kind of customer intelligence in terms of making banks smarter and being able to understand their customers better. And this is a combination of, we have this good picture that is based on analytical data set, but we also have transactions, which is just what is happening currently and what is impacting the decisions that you'll be making. So I think that fusion and being in a position where the customer intelligence becomes a real thing, genuinely based on financial data, is what we are focusing on and what we think is the future. It's something that keeps evolving, and financial institutions are in a position where, well, maybe they are not fully there, but we definitely have to see pretty good foundation and some promising signs in terms of trying to build those data-driven profiles of customers and then try to understand the customers better, there are lots of applications. So a lot of this is around just sales and marketing, but there is also quite a lot around vulnerability, around helping customers that are living paycheck to paycheck and just trying to lead to better outcomes.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, trying to bring give customers more services because you've got a better idea. Yeah, very cool stuff, man. We'll go ahead and leave it there. We've covered a lot of ground. So Jakub Piotrowski, VP of Product for Bud Financial, thank you very much for taking the time to walk us through the excellent work you all have done.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. And yeah, anytime.
Very good.